Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Mark Davis, a 23-year-old law student, walked down the slick streets of a small Texas town, his worn-out backpack slung over one shoulder. The rain had been relentless all day, soaking through his jacket, making him feel like the world was closing in around him. His father's death had left him with more debts than he could ever repay, and every step felt heavier than the last. As Mark passed the corner cafe, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number. Mr. Davis, this is Eleanor Brooks. I would like to meet with you. It's regarding your financial situation. Mark frowned, confused. He had never heard of an Eleanor Brooks, and had no idea how she knew about his debts. But something about the message piqued his curiosity. He walked into the cafe, his mind racing as he looked around. Eleanor was already sitting at a corner table, waiting. She was a striking woman, probably in her late 60s, her silver hair styled immaculately. She wore a tailored suit that exuded power and wealth, a stark contrast to Mark's own frayed jacket and damp clothes. Mr. Davis, please sit, Eleanor said, her voice calm and collected. I know what you're thinking. You're wondering why a woman like me would want to meet a struggling law student like you. Mark hesitated but sat down across from her. Yes, I'm curious. How do you know about my situation? Eleanor's piercing blue eyes met his, her gaze unwavering. I know everything, Mr. Davis. I know about your father's debts. I know you're on the brink of losing everything. But I can offer you a solution. Mark's heart raced. Was this a scam? A loan shark looking to take advantage of him? But Eleanor's demeanor was too calm, too assured. She wasn't trying to intimidate him, she was offering something. What kind of solution? He asked, his voice cautious. Eleanor smiled faintly. I need a husband. A man who can help me solidify my legacy. In exchange, I'll take care of your debts, your future, your financial security. It's a business arrangement, not a romantic one. What I need is a companion, someone to share my name, my estate. Nothing more. Mark stared at her, his mind reeling. A contract marriage? It sounded insane. But the more he thought about it, the more desperate the idea seemed to become. He could solve his financial problems, take care of his mother's medical bills, and avoid losing everything. He swallowed hard. And you expect me to marry you? Mark asked, disbelief in his voice. Eleanor nodded calmly. Yes. I know this is not what you imagined your life would be. But sometimes, we must make difficult decisions. Think of it as a business deal, not a love story. Mark was torn. He had spent every waking hour trying to dig himself out of debt. This woman had the power to change everything. He thought about his family, his future. He had nothing left to lose. I'll do it, he said finally, his voice low but firm. Eleanor smiled, the corners of her lips curling into a satisfied grin. Good. We'll make the arrangements immediately. And just like that, Mark's life was about to change forever. Later that week, Mark stood in a small courthouse, nervously adjusting his tie. Eleanor was beside him, her posture perfect, her expression serene as they exchanged vows. It was a quiet, simple ceremony, with only Eleanor's lawyer and a notary as witnesses. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the kind of marriage he had ever imagined. The words husband and wife felt foreign, unreal. But as Eleanor turned to him with a calm smile, he realized that this was his reality now. He had married for survival, not for love. As they left the courthouse, Mark couldn't help but wonder if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. What would his life be like now, living in the shadow of a woman who held so much power? Could this business arrangement really turn into something more, or was he trapped in a situation he would never escape from? As Mark entered Eleanor's grand estate for the first time, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had crossed a line he could never return from. But as Eleanor led him into the house, her smile never faltering, he realized that this was only the beginning. Stay tuned for more of Mark's journey. Would this arrangement lead to something unexpected? Or would he find himself lost in a world where love was the last thing on anyone's mind? Mark stood in front of Eleanor's grand estate, the gates opening slowly as he stepped inside. The mansion loomed ahead, its towering columns and pristine stone facade reminiscent of old money and power. Mark felt a sense of unease settle in his chest. This was Ithis' new life. A life he never expected, and certainly never wanted. As he entered the mansion, Eleanor was waiting, her smile as composed as ever. She gestured for him to follow her into the house. "Welcome, Mr. Davis," she said, her voice smooth, almost distant. "I trust you'll find everything to your liking." Mark nodded, though he felt like a stranger in this lavish world. The grand foyer was immaculate, a chandelier hanging from the ceiling, casting soft light over the marble floors. But nothing about it felt warm. It was all too perfect, too cold. Eleanor led him to a room on the second floor, a large, luxurious space with antique furnishings and a view of perfectly manicured gardens. "This will be your room," Eleanor said, her tone matter-of-fact. "You'll find everything you need here." Mark set his bag down on the bed, taking in the room. It was beautiful, certainly. But it felt like a prison. He had no idea what to expect from this arrangement, but he knew one thing: he wasn't here for love. He was here for survival. His thoughts drifted back to the day he had signed the contract. The decision had been made out of desperation, not desire. Over the next few days, Mark found himself living in a bubble. Eleanor's world was one of luxury, but it was also one of rules and expectations. His every move was scrutinized, every word weighed. They rarely spoke about anything personal. Instead, they moved through their days like business partners, she attending meetings with her, mingling at high society events, and her providing him with everything he could possibly need. It was a strange existence, one that left Mark questioning if he had made the right choice. But despite the emptiness, there were moments when he couldn't help but notice Eleanor's presence. She was always so composed, always in control. It wasn't until the first charity gala they attended together that he began to see a different side of her. The night of the gala, Mark stood by Eleanor's side as they mingled with the city's elite. He watched as she effortlessly navigated through conversations, her confidence radiating. But there was something else, something Mark couldn't quite place. As they made their way through the ballroom, Eleanor's hand brushed against his. It was brief, but Mark felt a warmth that startled him. It wasn't the warmth of affection, but of something else, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He quickly pulled his hand away, but the moment lingered. Later that evening, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the city lights, Eleanor turned to him. The soft hum of the gala inside seemed distant, and for the first time, Mark noticed the exhaustion in her eyes. "I know this arrangement is strange for you," she said quietly, her voice softer than usual. "But you need to understand that I don't do this for me. I do it for my legacy. And maybe there's something here that could work, if we give it a chance." Mark didn't know what to say. He had heard her words, but they didn't make sense. He had agreed to this marriage for one reason: to escape the crushing weight of his debts. Love had nothing to do with it. But as he stood there, looking at her, something inside him shifted. Was it pity? Or was it something more? He wasn't sure. As they turned to leave the balcony, Eleanor's hand brushed his again, this time lingering longer. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. The next day, Mark found himself in a small cafe, sitting alone with his thoughts. He wasn't sure what he was feeling, but he couldn't ignore the growing tension between them. Eleanor had been kind to him, almost too kind for someone who had entered this arrangement without any intention of emotional attachment. "What's happening to me?" Mark muttered to himself. I can't get caught up in this. But as he sat there, a sense of realization washed over him. Maybe he wasn't as unaffected by this marriage as he thought. Maybe Eleanor wasn't just the cold, calculating woman he had believed her to be. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to this than either of them had planned. The next evening, as they sat down to dinner, Eleanor looked at him across the table, her eyes softening slightly. "You're quiet tonight," she remarked. "Is everything all right?" Mark met her gaze, his mind racing. "Yeah," he replied, trying to mask the confusion he felt. "Everything's fine." But deep down, he knew that nothing was fine. His life had just taken a turn he never saw coming. And as he looked at Eleanor, he realized that this marriage, this contract, was slowly becoming something more than either of them had bargained for. Stay tuned for more. Mark's journey is just beginning. Will he be able to navigate this unexpected path? Or will the truth of their arrangement shatter everything they've built so far? The following week, Mark found himself standing in the grand hallway of Eleanor's mansion, feeling more like a guest than a husband. He still couldn't get used to the idea of living in a place like this. The ornate paintings on the walls, the expensive furniture, the polished floors that gleamed under the soft light, it all felt like a dream he had no place in. But this was his reality now. Every day, he became more aware of how different their lives were. He had nothing, while Eleanor had everything. As he walked down the hall, his mind wandered back to their first meeting. He remembered the way Eleanor had looked at him when she made her proposal. Her calm demeanor, her confidence, she had everything figured out. Or so it seemed. But over the past few days, Mark had begun to notice subtle cracks in her facade. She was not as invulnerable as she appeared. Mark was interrupted from his thoughts when Eleanor's voice called out from the living room. "Mark, could you come here for a moment?" He walked into the room, where she was sitting by the window, looking out over the sprawling estate. There was a certain sadness in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. Her usual composure seemed to falter just for a second. "I've been thinking about our arrangement," Eleanor said softly, her voice less firm than usual. "I know this isn't easy for you, or for me. But I need you to understand something. I didn't ask you to marry me just for a business deal. I wanted companionship." Mark paused. For a moment, he wasn't sure how to respond. Was she confessing something? Was she starting to change her mind about this arrangement? He knew he had to tread carefully. "Eleanor, I don't know what you're asking," Mark said, his voice uncertain. "You made it clear from the beginning this wasn't about love." Eleanor turned to face him, her eyes filled with a mix of regret and longing. "I know. But that doesn't mean I don't care. I'm not used to needing anyone, Mark. I built my life on independence. But sometimes I wonder if I've made the right choice." Mark felt a pang of sympathy for her. She had always seemed so strong, so in control. But now, in this vulnerable moment, he saw the woman behind the businesswoman, the person who had built everything but was still searching for something more. He sat down across from her, unsure of what to say. He didn't want to admit it, but he was beginning to care. It wasn't supposed to be this way. He was here to survive, not to fall for her. But the more time he spent with her, the harder it became to ignore the connection they were forming. "I didn't expect this either," Mark said quietly. "But maybe we can find a way to make this work. We don't have to be alone, Eleanor." For a moment, Eleanor's expression softened. She looked at him as if searching for something. "Do you really think so?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark nodded, though he wasn't sure if he believed his own words. He was still confused by his feelings for her. But one thing was clear: this marriage, this contract, was starting to become something neither of them had planned. The next few days were filled with subtle shifts in their dynamic. Eleanor no longer kept her distance as much. She would sit beside him at dinner, engage in small conversations, and even share personal stories. Mark found himself opening up in ways he hadn't expected. He talked about his family, about the dreams he once had before everything fell apart. He listened as Eleanor spoke about her life, about the loneliness that came with her success and the emptiness of having everything but no one to share it with. One evening, as they sat together in the library, Eleanor took a deep breath before speaking. "Mark, I know we're not in love. But I think I'm starting to see something I didn't expect. Maybe this wasn't just a business deal. Maybe, just maybe, it's becoming something real." Mark's heart raced as he looked at her. He had heard the words, but he wasn't sure if he was ready to believe them. Could he really fall in love with a woman he had married out of necessity? Could this arrangement evolve into something more than a contract? Before he could respond, Eleanor stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the stars. Mark followed her, standing beside her in silence. "I've never been good at trusting anyone," Eleanor said quietly. "But with you, it feels different." Mark didn't know what to say. All he knew was that, for the first time, he wasn't sure where this was heading. He had come into this marriage thinking he would never care for her. But now, he wasn't so sure. Stay tuned to see how their relationship continues to unfold. Will Mark and Eleanor finally admit what they're feeling? Or will they let the walls they've built between them tear them apart? The days following their conversation were different. Mark couldn't quite put his finger on it, but there was a shift in the air between him and Eleanor. The walls they had both carefully built around their emotions began to crumble, piece by piece. They were still strangers in many ways, but there was something real starting to grow between them. Eleanor was no longer the cold, distant businesswoman he had first met. Now, she was more human, more vulnerable in his eyes. One evening, as they sat together at dinner in the grand dining room, Mark noticed how much more relaxed she had become. Her usual composure was still there, but it wasn't forced. She laughed more easily now, even shared little anecdotes about her life before the wealth and power. "You know, I never wanted any of this," she said, gesturing around the room, her eyes distant for a moment. "I grew up in a small town. I used to dream of opening a bakery, a little place where I could make cakes and pastries for people. But somewhere along the way, I ended up in this life. Not because I wanted it, but because I thought it was the only way to prove myself." Mark listened intently. He had no idea Eleanor had once dreamt of something so simple, something so different from the world she now inhabited. "You never told me that," Mark said softly. "You've always seemed so, in control." She smiled faintly, the warmth in her eyes surprising him. "I had to be. I learned early on that if you don't take control, life will take control of you." Mark nodded, understanding more than she realized. "I get that. Life never goes the way you plan, does it?" Her gaze softened as she looked at him, as if she was seeing him for the first time. "No, it doesn't. But maybe that's not always a bad thing." As they finished their meal, the atmosphere between them had shifted. What started as a contract had become something neither of them expected. They were starting to feel like more than just business partners, more than just strangers forced into an arrangement. Later that night, Mark stood on the balcony, looking out over the city skyline. The cool breeze ruffled his hair as he lost himself in thought. He wasn't sure what had changed inside him, but he couldn't deny that Eleanor had become more than just a woman he was bound to by a contract. He heard the soft sound of footsteps behind him and turned to see Eleanor standing at the doorway, her expression unreadable. "I didn't expect you to be out here," she said, her voice quiet but clear. Mark turned back to the view, his heart pounding in his chest. "I was just thinking," he said, not sure if he wanted to share what was on his mind. But something about the night, the stillness, made him open up. About how everything has changed so quickly. How we've changed. There was a pause, and then Eleanor's voice broke the silence. "I never thought I'd be in a position like this," she said, her tone soft but honest. "I didn't expect to start relying on anyone. But somehow, I'm starting to rely on you." Mark felt his heart skip a beat. Could it be? Was she feeling the same way? He turned to her, his gaze searching her eyes. Eleanor, do you think this could be more than just a contract? I mean, could it turn into something real? For a moment, Eleanor didn't say anything. She simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she walked toward him, closing the space between them. I think it already is, she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. I think it's already more than either of us expected. Mark's heart raced as she stood before him. He could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the uncertainty that mirrored his own. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he reached out and took her hand. For the first time, it felt right. They stood there for a long moment, the city lights twinkling below them, the quiet of the night wrapping around them like a blanket. Neither of them knew what the future held, but for the first time, they were no longer just pretending. They were starting to believe in the possibility of something more. As the night wore on, Mark couldn't help but wonder, could this truly turn into the love neither of them had expected? Or was it just a fleeting connection, something that would fade when the reality of their arrangement set in? Only time would tell. Stay tuned for more. Mark and Eleanor's journey is far from over. Will they embrace the feelings they've started to share, or will the weight of their pasts tear them apart? Days passed, and the growing connection between Mark and Eleanor became undeniable. What had started as a business arrangement, a lifeless contract, was slowly transforming into something neither of them had expected. Their conversations grew deeper, their moments together more meaningful. Mark was starting to see Eleanor not just as a business partner, but as a person with her own hopes, dreams, and vulnerabilities. And for the first time in a long while, he felt like he wasn't just a means to an end, but someone she could lean on. One evening, as they sat together in Eleanor's office, reviewing some papers, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that they were teetering on the edge of something life-changing. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, a tension that neither of them knew how to address. You've been quiet tonight, Eleanor remarked, looking up from her papers. What's on your mind? Mark hesitated. The question caught him off guard. He had been thinking about them, about how much things had changed, about how much he was beginning to care for her. I don't know, he replied, his voice soft. I keep wondering if this is real. If what we're building here is real. Eleanor set her pen down and turned to face him, her eyes softening. I think it is, she said quietly. I never imagined I'd end up like this, depending on someone, but with you. I feel something I haven't felt in years. Mark swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. He had promised himself this wasn't supposed to be about love, but now, he couldn't ignore the truth any longer. He was falling for her. I didn't expect to feel this way either, Mark admitted, his voice low. But something about you, the way you've treated me, the way we've connected, I can't ignore it anymore. There was a long pause as Eleanor studied him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared, she confessed. Scared of what this could become. Scared of letting someone in after everything I've been through. But I'm also starting to believe in us. Mark's heart raced as he reached out, gently taking her hand in his. For a moment, neither of them spoke, but the silence between them was filled with everything they hadn't said aloud. It was a moment of pure connection, a fleeting moment that felt more real than anything they had shared before. We can take this slow, Mark said, his voice steady. We don't have to figure everything out right away. But I want to try. I want to see where this can go. Eleanor smiled, a small, genuine smile that softened the lines of worry on her face. I'd like that too. But even as she said those words, Mark could sense the doubt in her eyes. She was still holding something back, still unsure of fully opening her heart. And he understood that. Eleanor had built walls around herself for so long it would take time for them to come down. Later that week, as Mark was walking through the mansion, he overheard a conversation between Eleanor and her lawyer. He stopped in his tracks when he heard her name mentioned. Eleanor, we need to talk about the future of your estate, the lawyer was saying. If you don't make decisions soon, the company could face serious challenges. Mark's heart sank. He had known Eleanor was a powerful woman, but he hadn't realized just how much pressure she was under. Her entire world was on the line: her legacy, her company, her future. He couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. She had invited him into her world, but now he was seeing the cracks in the foundation. The pressure she was facing was enormous, and he wasn't sure how much longer she could keep up the facade of being in control. The next morning, Mark found Eleanor standing by the window, looking out over the estate. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm glow over everything. "Eleanor," he called softly, stepping into the room. "Are you okay?" She turned to face him, her eyes tired, but there was something different in them now. She wasn't hiding behind her usual mask of control. She was letting him in. "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this," Eleanor said, her voice trembling slightly. "The pressure is too much. The company, my family. I don't know what's going to happen." Mark stepped forward, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "You don't have to do it alone," he said. "You've got me. We've got this. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together." For the first time, Eleanor allowed herself to lean into his embrace, her body relaxing against him. She closed her eyes, savoring the comfort of his words, the warmth of his presence. In that moment, Mark knew they were no longer just playing roles. Something real was happening between them, something stronger than either of them had anticipated. But there was still so much to face, so much uncertainty ahead. Stay tuned to see how Mark and Eleanor navigate the challenges ahead. Can their bond survive the pressure of the world around them? Or will the weight of their pasts tear them apart? The next few days were filled with tension as Eleanor continued to face mounting pressure from her business dealings. Despite the bond they had begun to form, Mark couldn't ignore the weight of the world she was carrying. The walls she had carefully built around herself were still strong, and while she had begun to open up to him, he could tell she was holding back, hiding something deep inside. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Eleanor came home looking more exhausted than ever. Mark found her in the library, staring out the window, her expression distant. The usual composure she carried so effortlessly was slipping, and he could see the cracks in her armor. "Eleanor," he called softly, stepping into the room. She turned to face him, offering a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's been a long day," she said, her voice quiet. "The pressure is starting to take its toll." Mark walked over to her, standing beside her by the window. "You don't have to go through this alone," he said, his voice gentle. "I'm here, remember?" Eleanor looked at him for a moment, her gaze filled with uncertainty. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, Mark. The company, my family, it's all falling apart, and I'm supposed to hold it together. But I don't know if I can." For a moment, Mark didn't say anything. He reached out, gently taking her hand in his. The weight of her words hung in the air, and he knew that this was more than just about their marriage or the contract they had signed. This was about her, her life, her future. "You don't have to carry all of this by yourself," Mark said softly. "I'm not here just because of the contract, Eleanor. I'm here because I care about you. We'll figure this out together, whatever it takes." Eleanor's eyes softened, the tiniest hint of vulnerability breaking through. She squeezed his hand, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can trust anyone with this. I've spent my entire life keeping everything under control, pretending I have all the answers. But right now, I don't even know where to begin." Mark stepped closer to her, pulling her into an embrace. For the first time, she didn't pull away. She leaned into him, her head resting against his chest as he held her tightly. They stood like that for a long moment, the weight of the world pressing on them both, but in that silence, there was also a sense of peace. "I'm here, Eleanor," Mark said quietly, his voice steady. "And no matter what happens, we'll get through it." When she finally pulled away, Eleanor looked up at him, her eyes filled with something he hadn't seen before: hope. For the first time, she seemed to believe his words. Maybe, just maybe, they could face the storm together. The next day, Eleanor made a decision that surprised even herself. She called a meeting with her board members, something she had been avoiding for weeks. She knew it was time to confront the issues head-on, but the thought of facing them alone had always felt overwhelming. But now, with Mark by her side, she felt a newfound strength. As they sat around the conference table, Mark could see the shift in Eleanor. She was no longer the distant, unapproachable CEO. She was real, vulnerable, and determined to fight for her company and her future. "We need to make some changes," Eleanor said, her voice firm, yet laced with the exhaustion of someone who had carried too much for too long. "This business is my legacy, and I'm not going to let it crumble because I've been too proud to ask for help." Mark watched her with admiration. She wasn't just the woman he had married out of convenience anymore. She was a woman who had found the strength to let go of the control that had once defined her, and for the first time, Mark realized he wasn't just here to help her with business, he was here to support her in all aspects of her life. After the meeting, Eleanor looked at Mark, a small smile playing on her lips. "Thank you for being here," she said softly. "I don't know if I would have had the courage to do that without you." Mark smiled back, his heart full. "I'll always be here, Eleanor. You don't have to face anything alone anymore." But even as they stood there, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Eleanor's past than she had let on. There were still pieces of her story she hadn't shared, parts of herself that remained hidden. And he was determined to help her uncover them, no matter what it took. Stay tuned for more. Will Eleanor and Mark's bond continue to strengthen, or will the weight of the past tear them apart? There's still so much left to discover. The days following the board meeting were filled with a new sense of purpose. Eleanor had taken charge, making bold decisions to stabilize the company, and Mark could see the change in her. She was no longer the distant, calculating CEO who hid behind her business persona. She had become someone he could rely on, someone who had finally allowed herself to be vulnerable. But despite the progress, there was still something she was holding back. Mark could feel Ida's secret, buried deep inside her, something that she had yet to share. One evening, after a long day of work, Eleanor and Mark sat in the living room, the warmth of the fire casting soft shadows on the walls. Eleanor was quieter than usual, her gaze fixed on the flames. "Eleanor?" Mark asked softly, his voice full of concern. "What's going on? You've been distant again." She didn't look at him immediately, but after a few moments, she sighed deeply. "I'm not sure if I'm ready to tell you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never told anyone. It's something I've carried with me for so long." Mark's heart skipped a beat. He could see the pain in her eyes, and he knew this was something important. "Eleanor, you don't have to carry this alone anymore," he said, his voice steady. "You don't have to keep it a secret. Whatever it is, I'm here for you." Eleanor closed her eyes, taking a deep breath before finally speaking. "It's about my father," she began, her voice trembling. "He was the one who built this empire, but he was also the one who destroyed me. I've spent my whole life trying to live up to his expectations, trying to prove that I was worthy of this legacy. But she paused, as if struggling to find the words. "He was never there for me. He was always more concerned with power than with family." Mark's heart ached for her. He had always known that Eleanor's success had come at a price, but he never imagined the emotional cost she had paid. He used to tell me that I wasn't good enough, that I'd never be able to take over the company. That no matter what I did, it would never be enough," Eleanor continued, her voice cracking. "And when he passed away, I was left with all of this business, this responsibility and no one to guide me. I was supposed to take over, but I didn't feel ready. I still don't." Mark reached out and gently took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a comforting gesture. "You are enough, Eleanor. You've proven that time and time again. You've done things no one thought you could do. You're not just a businesswoman. You're a strong, capable person. And you don't have to do it alone." Eleanor looked at him, her eyes filled with tears she had been holding back for years. She had spent so much of her life building walls around her emotions, but now, with Mark by her side, she could finally let them down. I've spent so many years trying to prove I'm worthy of all this, she said softly, but I realize now that I've been running from my own pain. I've been pretending to be someone I'm not. Mark pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. He could feel the weight of her words, the burden she had carried for so long. And in that moment, he knew that this wasn't just about the company or the marriage contract. This was about two people who had found each other in the midst of their own personal struggles. You don't need to prove anything to anyone, Eleanor, Mark whispered. You're more than enough. And whatever happens, I'm here for you. We'll face it together. For the first time in a long while, Eleanor allowed herself to believe him. She wasn't alone anymore. She had someone who saw her for who she really was, someone who accepted her despite all the flaws and imperfections she had spent years hiding. As they sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, Eleanor realized that maybe, just maybe, she didn't need to carry the weight of her father's legacy alone. She didn't need to keep pretending. With Mark by her side, she could finally start living for herself. Stay tuned for more. Will Eleanor and Mark's bond continue to grow stronger? Or will the ghosts of the past threaten to tear them apart? Days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, Mark and Eleanor's connection grew deeper. The walls between them that had once seemed impenetrable were crumbling, and the bond they had started to build was becoming undeniable. But despite the progress, Eleanor couldn't help but feel the weight of the past bearing down on her. She had shared her father's secret with Mark, and he had been there for her in ways she never thought possible. Yet, a part of her still feared the future, fear of failure, fear of not living up to expectations, and fear of losing what they had fought so hard to build. One evening, after another long day at the office, Eleanor sat in her study, staring out at the city lights. The quiet hum of the city below felt like a distant reminder of the world she had once been part of, a world where she had to be strong, independent, and alone. But now, she was learning to rely on someone else, and it was harder than she had imagined. Mark found her there, standing by the window, her expression unreadable. He knew she was struggling, but he also knew she didn't want to talk about it. She had always kept her emotions locked away, preferring to deal with everything on her own. But he wasn't going to let her face this alone. Eleanor, he said softly, his voice steady but full of concern. I know you're carrying a lot right now. But I'm here. You don't have to do this by yourself. Eleanor turned to face him, her eyes tired but filled with gratitude. I know, Mark, she said quietly. I've spent so long pretending that I have everything under control, and now it feels like everything is slipping away. I don't know if I can do this. Mark stepped closer to her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. You don't have to have all the answers, Eleanor. You've already done more than most people could ever dream of. You've built this empire, and you've fought harder than anyone I know. But you don't have to do it alone anymore. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of emotions, fear, relief, and something else she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, hope. For the first time, she allowed herself to lean into him, letting go of the walls she had spent so long building. It wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about them, about finding a way to make this work, together. I'm scared, Mark, Eleanor whispered, her voice shaky. I'm scared of what might happen if I fail. I'm scared of letting you down, of letting everyone down. Mark gently cupped her face, lifting her chin so she was looking directly into his eyes. Eleanor, you're not going to fail. You've already come so far. And you don't have to carry all of this by yourself. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet between them was filled with the weight of their shared words, their shared journey. Eleanor closed her eyes, taking in a deep breath. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she could face it. Later that week, Mark and Eleanor attended a high-profile charity event together. It was a night filled with familiar faces, old acquaintances, and business deals. But as they moved through the crowd, Eleanor found herself more relaxed than usual. For the first time, she wasn't just playing the role of the powerful CEO, she was just a woman beside the man she had come to trust more than anyone. As the night progressed, Eleanor couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over her. She was no longer alone in this world of business, responsibility, and expectations. She had Mark by her side, and for the first time, she felt like she could be herself. When the event was over, as they walked out of the ballroom and into the cool night air, Eleanor turned to Mark, a soft smile on her face. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "For being here. For everything." Mark smiled back, his heart full. "You don't have to thank me, Eleanor. I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together." They stood there for a moment, side by side, looking out at the city lights. Eleanor realized that she had spent so much of her life trying to control everything, trying to be perfect. But now, for the first time, she was learning to let go, and it felt like freedom. Stay tuned. What lies ahead for Eleanor and Mark? Will they continue to build a future together, or will the challenges they face prove too much to overcome? The journey is far from over. Weeks passed, and as Mark and Eleanor continued to navigate their shared life, something undeniable had blossomed between them. What began as a business arrangement, a simple contract, had transformed into a partnership built on trust, vulnerability, and mutual care. Eleanor, once so guarded and independent, had allowed herself to rely on Mark in ways she never thought possible. And Mark, who had entered this arrangement with his own fears and insecurities, had found in Eleanor someone he could truly care for. But just when they both started to believe that their bond could overcome the weight of their pasts, a new challenge emerged. One evening, as they sat in the quiet of their living room, Eleanor received a phone call that would change everything. Her face, usually composed, became tense as she listened intently. Mark could see the worry in her eyes even before she spoke. "I'm sorry, Mark," Eleanor said, her voice tight. "The company, it's facing a crisis. If we don't make immediate changes, we could lose everything. My father's will, it's coming back to haunt us." Mark's heart sank as he looked at her, his mind racing with questions. He had known the pressure Eleanor was under, but he had never imagined it would come to this. "What do we need to do?" Mark asked, his voice calm but filled with concern. He could see the fear in Eleanor's eyes, and he wasn't about to let her face this alone. Eleanor took a deep breath, steadying herself. "We need to make some drastic decisions I wasn't prepared to face. It's not just about the company anymore, it's about the legacy my father left behind. I thought I could handle it, but now I'm not so sure." Mark stood up, walking over to her and taking her hand. "We've faced every obstacle together so far. We'll face this one too. Whatever happens, I'm with you." Her eyes softened, and for the first time in a long while, Eleanor allowed herself to let go of the burden she had been carrying alone. "Thank you, Mark," she whispered, her voice filled with both relief and uncertainty. "I don't know how to do this without you." The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and late-night strategy sessions. Eleanor had to make some tough decisions that would affect not only her company but also her personal life. And through it all, Mark was by her side, offering support and guidance, never wavering in his commitment to her. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Eleanor stood on the balcony, gazing out over the city. The weight of everything she had been through, everything she was about to face, was heavy on her shoulders. But as she looked out at the lights of the city, she realized something. She wasn't alone anymore. She had Mark, and that was enough. Mark joined her on the balcony, standing beside her in silence for a moment. Finally, he spoke. "You've done everything you could, Eleanor," Mark said softly. "And no matter what happens next, I'll be right here with you." Eleanor turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I've never had someone like you in my life, Mark," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know where I'd be without you." Mark reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands. "You'll never have to find out," he said, his voice steady. "We'll face whatever comes next, together." As they stood there, their hands intertwined, Eleanor knew that no matter how uncertain the future seemed, she wasn't facing it alone. For the first time in her life, she had someone who would stand by her through the good and the bad. And with Mark by her side, she felt ready to face anything. In that moment, Eleanor realized that the legacy she had been so afraid to carry, the legacy of her father, didn't have to define her. She could create her own legacy, one built on love, trust, and the strength to face whatever life threw her way. And with Mark by her side, she knew she would be able to do just that. Stay tuned for more. Mark and Eleanor's journey is far from over. Will they be able to overcome the final hurdles in their path, or will the weight of their pasts finally catch up with them? Only time will tell.